Welcome back. News and Talk 1380 WAOK, the voice of the community. Listen to People, Passion, and Politics podcast edition, pre-recording this. But of course, as we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of stuff going on the last week or so for Republicans. So I have described the last 2 weeks for Republicans as the worst weeks ever for a political party. Because if you really think about it, what political party has ever had this bad of a 2 weeks in a row? So let's just start 2 weeks ago. Congresswoman Lauren Boebert is in a movie or is in a play, a theatrical performance of Beetlejuice, of all places. She's vaping, more than likely marijuana. She's freaking out. She's flipping her arms all up in the air. She's cussing at people. She's flipping people off. Then they turn off the lights and she's got her hand in this man's crotch and he's fondling her bosoms and all those things. And then she said, oh, none of that happened. This is just the liberal media attacking me and smearing me. Then the video came out. It's like, oh, Lord, she a freak. And then because the video came out, people brought back up all the old accusations about her potentially having previously been a prostitute. And then the clip of her saying awkwardly during an event that she was not an escort for Ted Cruz. Just unprompted, she said that. People started bringing back up the pictures of her where she had a profile on Model Mayhem and SugarDaddyMeat.com. And the fact that she's a 36-year-old grandmother because she had a child at 16 and then that child had a child at 15 or 16. And all these things just gave the Republican Party a real black eye at a period of time when they were announcing the launch of their impeachment inquiry against President Biden. We're going to get to that. So then, the beginning of the next week, you have President Trump and a motion for summary judgment being convicted of fraud. The judge simply said that they could confirm, even without a trial, even without testimony, that just based on the paperwork, President Trump and his sons were guilty of fraud. And that the only point of having this trial now would be to determine damages. President Trump could face up to $250 million to $300 million in damages, as well, and perhaps more importantly, the dissolution of the Trump organization, the forfeiture of the Trump business licenses. It's called the corporate death penalty. In sum, the Trump organization, if they lose, the Trumps would never be able to do business in the state of New York again. Not under a different name, not under an alias. You cannot do business in the state of New York again if they lose this trial. And that was Tuesday of last week. Then that takes us to Wednesday, the Republican primary debate, number 2, part 2. And guess what? The Republicans completely lose their minds during this debate. The policies that they started suggesting, Vivek Ramaswamy said that he would repeal birthright citizenship. Note, the only reason Vivek Ramaswamy is a citizen is because of birthright citizenship of his parents. Nikki Haley said she would invade Mexico with U.S. Special Forces, which would start a war against Mexico, because no country is simply going to allow you to send your military into their country to fight their cartels, primarily because the cartels control much of the Mexican government. What you think is going to happen? So we could end up in a full-blown war with Mexico if Nikki Haley becomes president. Then Tim Scott, they gave him a softball question. They said, Timmy, how do you feel about Ron DeSantis saying slavery was good? And Tim Scott had previously made statements, but I guess his advisors had gotten to him and said that that talking about slavery doesn't poll well. So then Tim Scott said, look, I've been discriminated against, but I don't believe America is a racist nation. Well, Tim, that's just dumb. If you're saying that you've been discriminated against throughout your life, you should be saying, and I want to stop that from happening ever again. As president, I will make sure that we become a more free, fair. No, he knows the only way to appeal to his rabid MAGA supporters is to make it seem as if racism is an imaginary construct made up by black people, and that Ron DeSantis is right. There are plenty of really good parts about slavery. And this is Wednesday. Then also you had Chris Christie, who had a good line about Donald Trump ducking the debate, but then he ended it by saying, if you keep this up, we're going to call you Donald Duck. And that was just cringe, to a level of cringe that I don't think most people were really prepared for. But that was Wednesday. Thursday, Republicans will have their first impeachment inquiry hearing in Congress. And guess what? The whole thing was a dumpster fire. The first witness, Jonathan Turley, conservative law professor, they asked him, well, is there a basis for impeachment here? He said no. He says, is there a basis for an impeachment inquiry? He also said no. Said, is there any direct evidence of crimes tied to President Biden? Again, no. They go to the next witness. Do you have any direct evidence that President Biden committed a crime? No. Is there anything that could be found on the record that could indicate President Biden committed a crime? No. Is there anything here that is impeachable? No. This went on for about 6 hours. You had some histrionics. You had people going back and forth. Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman from Texas, went off on them people, which was quite hilarious. We might play a little bit of that later because it was entertaining. You had one of the Democrats doing stand-up comedy, making fun of the Republicans. The whole thing was a mess. And that was just Thursday. So then Friday comes, and now we're facing government shutdown. So Republicans are in overdrive, realizing they do not have the votes to pass a budget deal. And even if they could pass a budget deal within their conference, there's no set of circumstances where that will get through the U.S. Senate and get to the desk of the president. And polling was showing that Republicans are going to get blamed for this government shutdown because every government shutdown over the course of the last 30 years has been because of Republicans. So panicking, Kevin McCarthy, who had members who wanted him to just shut down the government, he cut a deal with President Biden to fund the government through a continuing resolution for the next 45 days. And they got 90 Republicans to vote for it, and then an overwhelming number of Democrats passed through the Senate, got to the president's desk. We averted the government shutdown. President Biden gets credit for it because he's able to broker a deal between Kevin McCarthy and the Dems, and the Republican House is enraged by this. I mean, enraged. So Matt Gaetz, the congressman from Florida, I'm going to talk a little bit more about him. He gets together a cadre of other Freedom Caucus conservatives, and they put together this plan to take out Kevin McCarthy. So as many of you remember, back in January when Kevin McCarthy was elected speaker, it took 15 rounds of voting, and he had to basically sell everything except for the kitchen cabinets and the silverware in order to become speaker. One of the things that he sold off was this thing called a motion to vacate, which now only requires one person to make a motion at any given time, and if they get a majority of support, then you lose your speakership. It's never been done before. They changed this rule just in January, just for Kevin McCarthy. And at the time that it happened, I made the bet. I said, will Kevin McCarthy last longer than a head of lettuce? So Kevin McCarthy just slightly outlived the lettuce in my freezer, but not by a lot, because this was coming on the heels of Liz Truss, the UK Prime Minister, having to resign after just 2 months. He's also a member of the Tory party, which is the equivalent of the American Republican Party. They're the far right-wing conservative party there. And the budget proposal that Kevin McCarthy put forward was nearly identical to the mini budget put forth by Liz Truss. So the mini budget is now 2 for 2 and taking out conservative leaders on both sides of the pond. So Kevin McCarthy goes on the Sunday shows and says, bring it on, to Matt Gaetz, because he thought he had the votes to survive a motion to vacate. But then this is where Kevin McCarthy messed up. So one, he threatened Matt Gaetz with expulsion from Congress because there's a ethics probe that's coming out that's going to talk about Matt Gaetz and all the children he had sex with. That is true. Matt Gaetz likes to pay child prostitutes. And that's a known fact in Congress, that he paid 16 and 17-year-old prostitutes. He sent out Venmos, and the Venmos said school supplies on them, that he previously showed pictures on the House floor of him having sex with various young women, never saying what they were of age or not. One congressman came out and said Matt Gaetz would brag about taking Viagra and drinking energy drinks just so he could have sex with more young prostitutes all night. So anything you can think of that Hunter Biden did, Matt Gaetz does the same thing. This is just rich, drunk frat boy activity that these people are taking into their 30s and 40s. So Kevin McCarthy makes a threat saying that they were going to expel Matt Gaetz if he went through this motion to vacate, because Kevin McCarthy at that time thought that he had the votes necessary. This is where Kevin McCarthy messed up. Then he started attacking Democrats, the same Democrats that had just saved him from the House closing down, from the government shutdown. He started attacking them and blaming them for the government shutdown. So guess what? Motion to vacate comes. All 210 Democrats vote against it, and also 8 Republicans. You only need 217 to put you out of office. 218 voted to put him out. And now they have to deal with Donald Trump on trial in the morning, Kevin McCarthy getting thrown out in the middle of the afternoon. The House is in chaos. Republicans have no ability to govern. And now we get to figure out what the hell happens next after this. We're going to talk about that after the break. News and Talk 1380 WAOK, People, Passion, and Politics on this Sunday afternoon. We will be back after the break.